Ethan Carter moved carefully through the dense forest, his boots pressing softly against the damp earth. The tall trees stretched high above him, their leaves rustling with the gentle wind. He loved this place, far from the noise of cities, where only the sounds of nature surrounded him. It was peaceful, quiet, and familiar. But today, something felt different. The birds had gone silent. The usual chittering of squirrels and rustling of small animals in the underbrush had stopped. A strange tension filled the air, making the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand up. He slowed his steps, eyes scanning the area. He was deep in the woods, far beyond where most people ventured. He expected to see a deer, maybe a bear, but not what he actually saw. There, just a few feet away, standing in the clearing between the trees, was someone. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She was not human. The figure was tall and slender, her skin a smooth shade of deep emerald green. A long, thin tail curled slightly behind her, twitching as if sensing danger. Her arms were slightly longer than a human's, her fingers ending in sharp but delicate claws. And then there were her eyes, large, golden, and glowing faintly, wide with fear as she stared directly at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Ethan barely had time to process what he was seeing before the alien woman suddenly bolted. With incredible speed, she turned and scrambled up a tree, her claws digging effortlessly into the bark. She moved like a wild animal, leaping from one branch to another, climbing higher and higher until she was nearly hidden among the leaves. Ethan took a slow step forward, careful not to startle her even more. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? How long had she been here? "Hey," he said cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The alien woman did not reply. She clung to the thick branch high above, watching him with those wide golden eyes. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She was afraid. Ethan raised his hand slowly, showing he had no weapons. "I'm not going to do anything, I swear." Still, she didn't move. Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. She was clearly intelligent, not just some wild creature. The way she reacted to him wasn't like an animal. It was like someone who had been hiding for a long time and just got caught. He needed to show her that he wasn't a threat. Carefully, Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out a small ration bar. It wasn't much, but if she had been out here for a while, she was probably hungry. He unwrapped it slowly and placed it on a nearby tree stump. Then he stepped back. The alien woman didn't move at first, but Ethan saw how her gaze flickered toward the food. She's interested. Encouraged, he took another slow step back. "It's for you," he said, motioning to the ration bar. "You can have it." Still, she hesitated. Ethan sighed and looked up at her. "You don't trust me, huh?" he muttered. "Can't blame you. But if you were dangerous, you would have attacked me already." He decided to give her space. If he lingered too long, she might just run away again. With one last glance at the alien woman in the tree, Ethan turned and walked a few steps back. He sat on a fallen log and pretended to focus on something else. He wasn't leaving, just waiting. Minutes passed. The forest was still eerily quiet. Then, a small movement. Ethan kept his gaze low, not wanting to scare her. He could hear the faintest rustling of leaves as she carefully climbed down the tree. She was cautious, so very cautious. But eventually, she landed on the ground near the tree stump. Ethan held his breath. She sniffed the ration bar, then took it quickly, retreating a few feet before eating it. Her movements were fast and precise, as if she was used to surviving in the wild. Ethan smiled slightly. Progress. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why she was hiding in this forest, but he was determined to find out. For now, though, he stayed quiet, letting her eat in peace. Somewhere in his mind, a single thought repeated itself. This is just the beginning. Ethan sat on the fallen log, careful not to move too fast. His heart was still pounding from what had just happened. He had seen an alien, Not in a movie, not in a dream, but here, right in front of him. And now she was on the ground, eating the food he had left for her. He kept his breathing slow, watching her from the corner of his eye. He didn't want to scare her away again. The alien woman ate quickly, her golden eyes flickering between Ethan and the forest around her. She chewed with small, sharp teeth, and her thin fingers gripped the ration bar tightly. She looked hungry, like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in a long time. How long has she been here? Ethan wondered. When she finished eating, she licked her fingers, almost like a cat cleaning itself, before stepping back. Then, as quickly as she had come down, she leaped onto a low tree branch, still watching him. Ethan exhaled. She was still afraid. "Okay," he said softly, trying to sound calm. "I get it. You don't trust me yet." The alien tilted her head slightly. The movement was quick, almost like a bird studying something unfamiliar. Ethan decided to try something else. He slowly pointed to his chest. "Ethan," he said. Then he pointed to her. "You?" She didn't reply. For a few moments, there was only silence between them. The alien woman stayed on the branch, her tail curling around it, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim forest light. Then she did something unexpected. She raised a slender green hand and pointed to herself. "Scifi," she said, her voice quiet and careful. Ethan's eyes widened. "She can talk." "Scifi," he repeated slowly. It felt strange on his tongue, but the moment he said it, her eyes narrowed slightly. She was studying him, testing him. Encouraged, Ethan pointed to himself again. "Ethan." She blinked, then repeated, "Ethan." A small smile tugged at Ethan's lips. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The silent understanding. For the next few minutes, they just watched each other. Ethan didn't rush anything. He knew that trust had to be built slowly. After a while, he reached into his backpack again and pulled out another ration bar. He placed it on the log beside him. But this time, he didn't walk away. Instead, he stayed still and waited. Scifi hesitated, her long fingers tightening around the branch. She looked between him and the food, as if deciding whether it was safe to come closer. Finally, after what felt like forever, she moved. She climbed down from the tree, slower than before, and walked toward the log. Ethan forced himself to stay completely still. Scifi grabbed the ration bar quickly, stepping back as if expecting him to attack. When Ethan did nothing, she unwrapped it and began eating, her gaze never leaving him. This time, she didn't run away after finishing. She just stood there, a few feet away, watching him with cautious curiosity. Ethan took the chance to try again. He pointed at himself. "Ethan." Scifi tilted her head. "Ethan." Then she pointed at herself. "Scifi." Ethan grinned. They were making progress. The first attempt at communication. Ethan wanted to learn more, but he knew words wouldn't be enough. He needed to try something else, something more visual. He grabbed a small stick and drew a rough circle in the dirt. Then he pointed at it. "Earth," he said. Scifi watched carefully. Her tail twitched slightly. Ethan then pointed to himself. "Ethan." Then he pointed at the drawing. "Earth." Scifi's eyes flickered with understanding. She hesitated, then reached down and drew something next to Earth, a smaller circle, slightly different in shape. She tapped it lightly. Timeri. Ethan's breath caught. Was that her home? "You're from Timeri?" he asked slowly, pointing to her. Scifi blinked. Then, after a few seconds, she nodded. Ethan's mind raced. She came from another planet. She crash-landed here. But why? And how long had she been hiding? Before he could ask more, Scifi suddenly tensed. Her golden eyes darted toward the trees behind them, and her body went completely still. Ethan felt it too. A presence. Something, or someone, was out there. His survival instincts kicked in. He turned his head slowly, scanning the dense forest. The trees rustled slightly, but there was no wind. Then, a faint, distant clicking sound echoed through the air. Ethan frowned. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a human voice. It was something else. Saira stepped back, her tail curling tightly. Fear flashed in her eyes. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, it was hunting her. Ethan's chest tightened. He had just met Saira, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. Ethan's body tensed as he scanned the forest. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves. The clicking sound had vanished, but he knew something, or someone, was out there. Saira stood completely still, her golden eyes fixed on the trees. Her tail curled tightly behind her, and her claws flexed slightly, ready to react. She looked like a hunted animal, afraid but prepared to fight if needed. Ethan's mind raced. If something was chasing her, had it been following her for a long time? Was it dangerous? Slowly, he leaned toward her and whispered, "Who is it?" Saira didn't answer with words. Instead, she placed her palm against her own chest and then pointed toward the darkness of the trees. Her fingers trembled slightly. She was being hunted. Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't know who, or what, was after her, but he wasn't about to let them take her. He made a quick decision. "Come on," he whispered, motioning for her to follow him. Saira hesitated. She clearly didn't trust him completely yet, but after a moment she nodded. She had no other choice. Ethan moved carefully, leading her away from the clearing and deeper into the woods. He knew these forests well. He had spent years hiking and exploring them. If they needed to hide, he knew exactly where to go. The hidden shelter. They moved quickly but quietly. Saira was incredibly fast, her movements almost too smooth for a normal body. She barely made a sound as she followed him, her golden eyes scanning everything around her. After about 10 minutes, they reached a small cave nestled between two large boulders. Ethan had found it years ago during one of his hikes, but he had never needed to use it, until now. "In here," he whispered, ducking inside. Saira hesitated only for a second before following him. Inside, it was dark, but not completely. A few cracks in the rocks let in thin streams of moonlight, enough for them to see. The space was small, but it would work as a hiding place. Ethan pressed his back against the stone wall and exhaled slowly. His heart was still racing. Saira stood across from him, her breathing steady but tense. She was waiting. "Do you know who's after you?" Ethan asked quietly. Saira hesitated. Then she raised her hand and drew a small shape in the dirt. It looked like a tall figure with long limbs. She tapped it twice and then let out a soft, clicking noise, similar to the sound they had heard earlier. Ethan's stomach tightened. She wasn't alone on Earth. "More of your kind," he guessed. Saira shook her head. "Not Mary," she said slowly, her voice careful. "Different." Ethan frowned. "Not Mary. So, they're not from your planet." She nodded. Then she did something strange. She made a small fist with her fingers and then spread them out quickly, like an explosion. Ethan stared at the gesture. "War?" he asked, unsure. Saira's eyes darkened. She nodded. Ethan's mind spun. So there had been some kind of war between her people and whoever was chasing her. And now, that enemy was here, on Earth, hunting her down. His grip tightened into a fist. He wasn't an expert in alien battles, but one thing was clear. She was in danger. A small gesture of trust. The cave was silent for a long time. Saira sat near the entrance, her tail flicking slightly as she listened for any sounds outside. Ethan watched her carefully. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were tense, and her breathing was slower than before. She hasn't slept properly in a long time, Ethan realized. Without thinking, he reached into his backpack and pulled out his extra jacket. It wasn't much, but it was warm. Slowly, he held it out to her. Scifi blinked in surprise. She looked at the jacket, then at him. Her golden eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to understand his intentions. "It's just to keep warm," Ethan said. "You look like you need rest." Scifi hesitated for a moment. Then, very slowly, she reached out and took the jacket from his hands. Ethan watched as she carefully wrapped it around herself. The fabric was too big for her, but she pulled it close, curling her tail around her body. For the first time, her body relaxed slightly. Ethan leaned back against the cave wall and sighed. This was crazy. Just yesterday, he had been alone in the forest, enjoying the quiet. Now he was hiding in a cave with an alien woman, protecting her from something unknown. But somehow, he didn't regret it. In the dim light, Scifi glanced at him. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "Thank you." Ethan's eyebrows rose. It was the first time she had spoken without hesitation. He smiled slightly. "You're welcome. The hunt continues." They stayed silent for a while. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Then, the clicking sound returned. Ethan's body tensed immediately. Scifi's ears twitched, and she slowly sat up, her golden eyes glowing slightly in the darkness. She looked toward the cave entrance, every muscle in her body alert. Ethan reached for the small knife he kept in his boot. Not much against an alien threat, but better than nothing. The clicking grew louder, closer. Ethan held his breath. Whoever was looking for her was still out there. Scifi's fingers curled into tight fists. Ethan didn't know what kind of war she had escaped from, but now, that war had come to Earth. And whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. Ethan pressed his back against the cold stone wall of the cave, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The clicking sound outside was growing louder. Scifi crouched near the entrance, every muscle in her body tense. Her golden eyes flickered in the dim light, reflecting something primal, something dangerous. She wasn't just afraid. She was preparing for a fight. Ethan gripped the small hunting knife in his hand. It felt useless against an unknown alien threat, but he wasn't going to just sit here and do nothing. Then, the sound stopped. For a few long seconds, the forest was completely silent. Ethan held his breath. Were they gone? Scifi's tail twitched. She tilted her head slightly, listening, and then, her eyes widened in alarm. Before Ethan could react, she lunged at him, pushing him to the ground just as a thin metallic object shot through the cave entrance. It embedded itself in the stone wall right where Ethan had been standing. His chest heaved as he turned his head, looking at the weapon. It was a small, needle-like projectile, sharp and deadly. If Scifi hadn't moved him, it would have gone straight through his skull. Ethan swallowed hard. That was close. Scifi didn't respond. She was already on her feet, her sharp eyes scanning the cave entrance. She knew they weren't safe here anymore. She reached down and grabbed Ethan's wrist, pulling him up. "Move," she whispered urgently. Ethan didn't argue. The escape into the forest. They slipped out through a narrow opening in the cave, avoiding the main entrance. The air outside was cold, and the forest was eerily still. The clicking noise had stopped, but that didn't mean the enemy was gone. Scifi led the way, moving with incredible grace and speed. Ethan struggled to keep up, his boots crunching against the leaves. "Where are we going?" he whispered. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she suddenly stopped and turned toward him. Her expression was serious. "Hiding. No good," she said, her voice still unfamiliar with human words. "We run." Ethan frowned. "Run? Where?" Scifi pointed toward the east, deeper into the forest. "No choice. We move, or they find us." Ethan exhaled sharply. He didn't like it, but she was right. Staying in one place had already put them in danger. Whoever was hunting her wasn't going to stop. "Fine," he said. "Let's go." They moved quickly, dodging between trees and weaving through the thick undergrowth. Scifi barely made a sound, but Ethan wasn't as skilled. He stepped on a dry branch, and the loud crack echoed through the night. Scifi immediately turned, her golden eyes sharp with warning. Ethan froze. Then, from somewhere behind them, the clicking returned. But this time, it was louder, and it was closer. Scifi grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him forward. Run. The chase. Ethan's heart pounded as they sprinted through the forest. Branches whipped against his face, and his legs burned from the effort. But he didn't stop. He didn't dare stop. The clicking noises multiplied. There wasn't just one hunter behind them. There were more. Ethan didn't look back, but he could feel the presence of something fast, something deadly. It was gaining on them. Scifi suddenly veered to the right, dragging Ethan with her. He nearly lost his balance, but then he saw why. They were approaching a sharp cliffside. The ground ended just ahead, dropping into a dark valley below. Ethan skidded to a stop, his breath ragged. We're trapped. Scifi glanced back. The clicking sounds were too close now. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Ethan's hand and jumped. The fall. Ethan had no time to think. 1 second he was standing on solid ground, and the next he was falling. The air rushed past his ears, and for a terrifying moment, he thought they were going to hit the rocks below. But then suddenly, Scifi twisted in midair, her tail snapping out like a whip. She grabbed onto an overhanging branch, her grip impossibly strong. Ethan wasn't so lucky. His body plummeted downward, but before he could hit the ground, Scifi caught his wrist. The sudden stop jerked his entire body, and he dangled in midair, his feet swinging above the rocky valley floor. He looked up, breathless. Scifi was hanging onto the tree with just one arm, her muscles straining, her face twisted in pain. But she didn't let go. With a sharp grunt, she pulled him up, her strength shocking him. They both collapsed onto a wide branch, breathing hard. Ethan rolled onto his back, staring at the night sky. "Okay," he panted. That was insane. Scifi didn't respond immediately. She sat up, her ears twitching as she listened. Then she whispered, "They stop." Ethan blinked. "What?" She gestured toward the cliff. "They do not follow." Ethan frowned. That didn't make sense. The hunters had chased them all this way, but now they had stopped. Why? He sat up, looking toward the top of the cliff. The clicking sounds were fading. The hunters were still there, but they weren't coming down. Ethan glanced at Scifi. "What's down here?" She was silent for a long moment. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, "Something worse." Ethan sat on the thick tree branch, breathing hard, his heart still racing from the fall. His arms ached where Scifi had grabbed him, but he was too relieved to care. They had escaped. Or so he thought. Scifi's golden eyes were fixed on the darkness below. She wasn't celebrating. She was afraid. Ethan swallowed and followed her gaze. Below them, the valley stretched into a vast, shadowy landscape. Strange rock formations jutted out of the earth like twisted fingers, and a thick mist curled along the ground. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. Scifi didn't answer right away. Then, in a whisper, she said, "Forbidden." Ethan frowned. "Forbidden? Why?" She turned toward him, her expression serious. "Hunters do not follow. Fear this place." Ethan's stomach tightened. The creatures chasing them had been relentless, but now they had stopped. Whatever was down here, it had to be worse. A sudden howl echoed through the valley. The sound was deep and unnatural, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything he had ever heard before. Scifi's tail flicked, her muscles tensing. "We move. Now." Ethan didn't argue. The descent. They climbed down carefully, using the twisted branches for support. Ethan's boots slipped against the damp bark, but Scifi moved like she had done this before. She was built for this kind of terrain. When they reached the valley floor, Ethan felt an immediate change in the air. It was thick, heavy, and almost electric. The mist curled around his legs like ghostly fingers. Scifi sniffed the air. Her ears twitched. She was listening. Ethan gripped his knife. "Where do we go?" Scifi pointed toward a narrow pathway between two jagged rock formations. "Fast." Ethan nodded and followed her. Every step felt wrong, like the ground itself was watching them. He kept his eyes on the path ahead, but in the corner of his vision, things moved in the mist. He wasn't sure if it was real or if his mind was playing tricks on him. The figures in the mist. They moved quickly, keeping to the rocks for cover. The strange howls came again, closer this time. Ethan's breath hitched. Then something shifted in the mist. A dark shape slithered through the fog, moving low to the ground. It was fast, too fast. Ethan froze. "Scifi," he whispered. She turned just as the shape lunged. A massive, shadowy creature burst from the mist. It had long, clawed limbs and glowing red eyes. Its body was wrapped in black tendrils, shifting and twisting like living smoke. Ethan barely had time to react before it swiped at him. He dove sideways, rolling onto the rocky ground. The creature's claws missed him by inches, leaving deep gouges in the stone. Scifi hissed, her sharp claws unsheathing as she moved between Ethan and the beast. The creature let out a low guttural growl. More figures stirred in the mist. There wasn't just one. There were many. Ethan gritted his teeth. Great, just great. The fight for survival. The first creature lunged again, its claws slicing through the air. Scifi dodged with inhuman speed, twisting her body and slashing at the beast's side. Her claws connected, tearing through its dark form. But instead of blood, a thick black mist spilled from the wound. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech and staggered back. Ethan saw his chance. He gripped his knife tightly and lunged forward, driving the blade into the creature's chest. The weapon sank in, but instead of piercing flesh, it felt like stabbing into cold smoke. The beast howled but didn't fall. It twisted its head toward him, its red eyes burning with anger. Ethan yanked the knife free, stumbling backward. Yeah, that didn't work. Scifi grabbed his arm. "Run." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. They bolted, weaving between the rocks as the creatures gave chase. The howls echoed, growing louder as more shadows slithered toward them. Ethan's lungs burned. His legs ached. But stopping wasn't an option. Then, up ahead, a structure. A massive stone doorway stood at the edge of the valley, half buried in the rock. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing faintly in the dark. Scifi's eyes widened. There. Ethan didn't know what it was, but if Scifi thought it was safe, that was good enough for him. They sprinted toward the doorway, the creatures just seconds behind them. The door of the ancients. Scifi reached the stone doorway first. She placed her hand on the symbols, and the carvings began to glow brighter. A low rumbling sound filled the air. Ethan slid to a stop beside her. "What's happening?" Scifi didn't answer. She pressed her palm firmly against the stone. The symbols pulsed, and suddenly, a burst of light exploded outward. The creatures let out horrible screeches, their bodies twisting and writhing as the light touched them. The black mist around them dissolved, and within seconds, they were gone. Ethan's chest heaved as he stared at the empty valley. The creatures had vanished. He turned to Scifi. "What was that?" She pulled her hand away from the glowing stone, her eyes still filled with tension. "This place," she said slowly, "belongs to the ancients." Ethan frowned. "The ancients." Scifi nodded. "Old ones, before my kind. Before them." She motioned toward where the creatures had been. Ethan stared at the glowing doorway. Who were these ancients, and why did their power still exist here? One thing was clear. They had only just begun to understand the danger they were in. And this valley held more secrets than they could imagine. Ethan leaned against the massive stone doorway, his breath still heavy from the chase. The valley was silent now. The creatures had disappeared the moment Scifi activated the glowing symbols. But he knew it wasn't over. Something was still watching them. Scifi stood next to him, her tail flicking restlessly. She placed a hand against the ancient carvings, her golden eyes scanning the symbols carefully. The soft blue glow pulsing from the stone gave her fur an eerie light. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. What is this place? Scifi didn't look at him. Safe. For now. He exhaled. I'll take that. The valley behind them was covered in thick mist, but he could feel the weight of something unseen, like 1,000 eyes hidden in the darkness. Whatever those shadow creatures were, they had feared this place. And if the hunters wouldn't come down here either, that meant something even worse had once lived in this valley. The doorway opens. Scifi pressed her hand firmly against the stone again. The symbols brightened, and with a deep rumbling sound, the doorway slowly slid open. Dust and small pebbles fell from the edges, revealing a dark tunnel stretching into the earth. Ethan hesitated. We're going inside, aren't we? Scifi nodded. No choice. Night is coming. Ethan sighed. Fantastic. He pulled out a small flashlight from his backpack, flicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing smooth stone walls covered in more symbols. The air inside was dry, old, like this place had been sealed for centuries. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside after Scifi. The door rumbled shut behind them. The Hall of the Ancients. As they moved deeper, Ethan noticed something strange. The air was getting warmer, not colder. The further they went, the more the walls began to glow faintly, lighting the path ahead. Then they stepped into a massive chamber. Ethan's mouth fell open. Whoa! The ceiling stretched high above them, carved with swirling patterns that seemed to move when he looked too long. Strange pillars lined the walls, each one etched with unfamiliar symbols and figures. At the center of the room stood a massive stone pedestal, and on top of it rested an object, something covered in dust, but still glowing softly. Scifi approached it slowly. She reverently brushed her fingers across the surface, wiping away the dust to reveal a metallic gauntlet. Ethan frowned. That's a glove. Scifi's expression was unreadable. Not glove. Key. Ethan's confusion deepened. Key to what? Scifi didn't answer. Instead, she carefully picked it up. The moment her fingers wrapped around it, the entire chamber trembled. The awakening. Deep mechanical hum echoed through the chamber. The walls brightened, the symbols flashing as if waking from a long sleep. Ethan's stomach twisted. Up was that supposed to happen? Scifi's ears twitched. Not sure. A moment later, a holographic figure appeared at the center of the room. It was tall and humanoid, but its features were strange. Its head elongated, its body wrapped in flowing metallic robes. Glowing blue eyes stared down at them, emotionless and powerful. Ethan staggered back. What the hell? The figure spoke, its voice deep and echoing. The key has been claimed. Ethan looked at Scifi. I don't like this. The hologram continued. The last of the ancients has fallen. The war is lost. If you are seeing this, the devourers have returned. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Devourers. The image flickered. We fought them. We sealed them away. But our time ended. The figure turned its glowing gaze toward Scifi. You are not one of us. Yet you hold the key. Scifi swallowed. What is key? The hologram's eyes glowed brighter. A weapon. A door. A choice. The air grew heavy. Ethan could feel it, like something ancient and powerful had just woken up. Then the hologram faltered, its voice growing weak. You must leave this place, if the devourers, if they wake. The light cut out. The chamber shook violently. Ethan felt his stomach drop. I have a very bad feeling about this. The ruins begin to collapse. The walls cracked as the ground rumbled beneath them. Dust and loose stones fell from above. Scifi grabbed Ethan's wrist. We go. Now. They sprinted toward the tunnel, dodging falling debris. The entire structure was collapsing. Whatever had been keeping this place sealed had just failed. A deafening roar echoed through the tunnels behind them. Ethan didn't look back. He didn't want to see what was waking up. They burst out of the ancient door just as the entire entrance caved in behind them, sealing whatever was inside forever. Or at least, that's what Ethan hoped. They collapsed onto the rocky ground, coughing as dust filled the air. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Ethan looked at Scifi. What now? She lifted the metallic gauntlet, its glow now pulsing like a heartbeat. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. We get ready. Ethan frowned. For what? Scifi's tail flicked. For war. Ethan sat on the rocky ground, staring at the metallic gauntlet in Scifi's hands. Its soft, eerie glow pulsed like a heartbeat, filling the night with an unnatural light. The valley was silent again, but not the peaceful kind of silence. It was the silence before a storm. He swallowed hard. So, war. Scifi's golden eyes didn't leave the gauntlet. Yes. Ethan ran a hand through his dust-covered hair. Against who? Scifi's ears flicked. Not who. She looked at the collapsed ruins behind them, where the ancient's hologram had warned them. What? Ethan exhaled. Right. The Devourers. The name alone sent a shiver down his spine. They had barely survived the shadow creatures in the valley. But whatever was coming next, it had to be worse. The first signs. A low tremor ran through the ground. Ethan's breath caught. Tell me that was just an earthquake. Scifi didn't answer. She was standing now, her tail stiff, her ears perked, listening. Then, far in the distance, a pillar of black mist rose into the night sky. Ethan's stomach twisted. That's not good, is it? Scifi's claws flexed. No. From within the mist, deep howls echoed, not just one or two, but dozens, maybe hundreds. Then, glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness. The Devourers were waking up. The escape plan. Ethan jumped to his feet. We need to go. Now. Scifi nodded. To the ship. They ran. The rocky ground was uneven, but fear pushed them forward. Behind them, the howls grew louder, and Ethan could hear the thunderous footsteps of something massive moving in the mist. His lungs burned, but he didn't stop. They had to make it to the ship, their only way out of here. Then, just ahead, Ethan spotted the metallic wreckage of the escape pod he had landed in. It was half buried in dirt, its hull scorched and cracked, but it was still there. Hope surged in his chest. There it is. But before they could reach it, a massive shadow rose from the mist behind them. Ethan risked a glance over his shoulder and felt his blood turn to ice. A Devourer Titan loomed in the darkness. It was easily 20 feet tall, its black tendrils shifting and twisting like a living nightmare. Its red eyes locked onto them, and with a bone-chilling screech, it lunged. The last stand. Ethan grabbed Scifi's arm and dived forward, just as the massive claws crashed into the ground behind them. Rocks exploded into the air, dust blinding them for a second. Ethan coughed, scrambling to his feet. We are so dead. Scifi's grip tightened on the ancient gauntlet. No. She pulled the device onto her arm. The moment it clicked into place, a surge of energy burst outward. The symbols along its surface glowed brighter. This time, not a soft pulse, but a fierce burning light. The Devourer Titan hesitated. Scifi lifted her arm. The gauntlet hummed, its glow intensifying. Then, with a sharp motion, she thrust it forward. A blast of energy erupted from the device, slamming into the Titan's chest. The creature screeched, its form twisting violently, as if the light was tearing it apart. Ethan's eyes widened. Whoa! The Titan let out one final, horrific howl, before collapsing into mist and vanishing. Scifi staggered, breathing hard. The gauntlet dimmed slightly. Ethan grabbed her shoulder. Are you okay? She nodded. More coming. Ethan turned. She was right. The black mist was swirling again. More red eyes flickered in the darkness. They weren't done yet. The final choice. Ethan looked at the escape pod. It was their only way off this planet. If they ran now, they could escape. Survive. But what about the next planet? And the one after that? The Devourers weren't just a problem here. If they had been sealed away for this long, then there was a reason. If they escaped, the universe wouldn't stand a chance. Savira seemed to sense his hesitation. She met his gaze. We fight. Ethan took a deep breath. This wasn't just about them anymore. He looked at the gauntlet, then at the valley where the creatures gathered. His grip tightened around his knife. We fight. The war begins. Saira nodded, her golden eyes burning with determination. The gauntlet glowed brighter, responding to her resolve. The mist swirled violently as the Devourers charged toward them. Ethan raised his weapon. The first battle of the last war had begun.